I'm really glad to be here. I think pretty excited. I attend a lot of conferences in the recent past, and this is the most engaged audience I've seen. So congratulations for you to be awake so far. So well done. So just two more points before I start. The first one is I will use procurement and supply chain synonymously, so I will use supply chain. So no offense to my procurement folks, right? We always debate that procurement is part of supply chain or not. So let's the debate continue. So I'm not going to argue that. The second one, I would like to thank all the translators. They are doing a fantastic job in translating in English and with a very good accent. I'm your biggest nightmare, so see if you can follow me, right? Okay. Right, so we'll talk about this how to create a supply chain strategy. Is a how-to question. So when we use any sentence, we start with how to. It's a process question, right? So I'm not going to give a recipe of what to do. Mostly we'll talk about how to do it. So, and when you adopt the how-to, you can adopt however you like. So what we're going to discuss today, I will predominantly focus on the 4 pillars of supply chain strategy, which again is mostly I've learned from experience, some from theory, but mostly from experience and working for big multinational corporations. I will share an example of the Swot analysis, how the Swot analysis can be used in supply chain. I will talk about the real example of the goals, the strategies, and the tactics, and how I've used to create a supply chain strategic plan. So I will share a real life example what I've created. Okay, so since Orhan was throwing up some really nice quotations, so I thought I'm going to throw one as well, right? There are no secret to success. It is a result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failures, right? So we know everything, but I think the key message here is learning from failure. There is a very interesting quote I also hear is, if you have not failed, that means you have never tried. So try different things, fail, and do it again. Okay, so I don't know what Roman said, but the key message here is I was one of the few lucky people, or unlucky, depends how you see it. I did manage to do my PhD while working full time. It took me 8 daunting years, but I eventually get there. So rest you can read, but the story goes like this. So when you finish your PhD, you are obliged to write research papers. And I was too lazy to write research papers, right? But I have a lot of content. I have a lot to say. I like to share knowledge. And as a profession, I think is a responsibility to share the knowledge. So one thing I learned is blogging, right? So I start a very small blog. In one day, I just bought a book on WordPress, and I started writing, and it was mainly my thesis on a small chunks. My friend says, I mean, it's a bit crazy, but then what I found out, I was not the only crazy person. There's a few other crazy people who are following me as well. So it was started at Muddassirism, which is the extension of my name. But after two years, I've gained a lot of following. I don't do any marketing. And last year, I've changed my blog name from Muddassirism to SCM Dojo. So SCM is Supply Chain Management. Dojo is a Japanese word which means learning or meditation. So Dojo is basically a place to karate and fight. So this is my intention. So the name represent SM Dojo is basically a learning place for the supply chain professionals. I've got about 25,000 LinkedIn followers, 77,000 page views. So if you go and want to have a look, please have a look. But there's a huge amount of supply chain experts here and normal our supply chain colleagues as well. So I would recommend if you have a knowledge, you have something to say, please do so. I won't be here if I won't be doing this, right? So that's something of interesting. Okay, so we use these terms goal, strategy, and tactics very synonymously. So it's important to differentiate between the three. A goal is a set target, a number you want to achieve. For example, you want to achieve a 95% on-time delivery, right? That is a goal. Or I want to finish SIPs by next year. That is a goal. So it's a target, a smart goal, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time scale, right? So that's a goal. And the strategy. Strategy have various definitions, but the best one which I like is a strategy is a set of decisions in a certain directions, right? Again, a set of decisions in a certain direction. So if you want to say we want to grow in, for example, the Middle East, right? So you have to decide what decisions you want to take to grow in Middle East, right? So that's the strategy. The tactics are the specific actions you want to take to achieve the strategy, right? So if you say, okay, I want to grow in Middle East, then what I have to do? I have to go and hire maybe a local salespeople, do some alliances, do some partnerships, right? So before we go to the 4 pillars, I thought is to differentiate between the 3. Okay. So now this is the crunch. 4 pillars of supply chain strategy. So when we think about creating a strategy for your team, for your business, for anything, what I always talk about, okay, what we'll do for our people who work in supply chain. What are my key processes in supply chain? And what systems we're going to use and how we want to manage the systems. And most importantly, execution, right? Supply chain is fortunately, who are engineers like me, is a great profession because most things you can measure. It's mathematical, right? You can measure the results. Even for the big companies, and I've seen they have 200 slides of strategy, market analysis, product line roadmaps, manufacturing footprint, resourcing strategy. But those strategic documents do not actually have execution strategy, right? And this is where I actually trying to promote right now. And when I work in the businesses and I'm into those, let's call it strategic planning discussions. When I say, okay, you put the numbers in, this is what you need to do in 3 years' time. But actually, how are you going to do it? What is your execution plan? So we'll discuss more on the execution side. Okay, people. So before we start about people, I have 2 questions. The first question, how many of you have a promotion or in the last 5 years as a managers, and you are replaced by one of your team members and your company doesn't have to hire from outside? How many people are there? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Okay, good 5 to 10%. Thank you for raising the hand. I'll connect the dots at the end why I'm asking this question. Second question, which is more interesting. How many of you, when you're growing up in your school and college, say, okay, when I want to grow up, I want to be a supply chain professional, and you have a posters of maybe Ramon and Mariana on the home, like footballers, right? This is what I want to be. So how many of you actually want to be a supply chain professional or just happen to be there? Yeah, not many hands, right? So this is what I thought. Okay, so this is what I found when I entered in supply chain. So I have a degree in supply chain, but when I enter into the supply chain as a manager or a leader, when I was working as a head of supply chain for a big organization, $500,000 billion business, what I found out, most people just end up in supply chain. So they were in manufacturing on the shop floor, they did a good job, they know Excel spreadsheet, they end up in the manufacturing or from manufacturing to a planner, right? Or they just happen to be in finance, they like supply chain, they put me into supply chain. And this is where we have to focus. So we use this word very oftenly, and almost it's a redundant word. Oh, people are our asset. But what do you mean by that? How you define the people are your asset? You have to measure that, right? Assets are measurable. So if you don't measure that, then it becomes a very fake statement, right? So how you define people your assets? So one way of defining the way I see people are your assets is defining the roles and responsibilities very clearly, right? That's fun. Then you have to have their own development plan. Because if you think something is your asset, then you have to make sure there's a pathway for them. There is a development scope for them, right? So that's very important. And understand their development needs and competencies. So a little story about my job as a division supply chain. So I have a plants in Romania, China, France, UK, Germany, right? And altogether there was about 220 supply chain and professionals. So how do I know what they don't know? This is the biggest question, right? So If I ask you, how do you know what you don't know, it's very difficult to tell. So what I did was I have used a supply chain competency, or I used to call it materials management competency assessment model. There's quite a few available. I have one available on my blog if you want to use it. Is to say, okay, let's assess yourself in terms of the technical competency I'm talking about, demand planning, inventory management, supply planning, capacity management, master production scheduling, sourcing, logistics and distribution, so on and so forth. At the end of the score, then we know that, for example, some people who are good in demand planning and sourcing but not good in risk assessment, then we say, okay, let's provide you the course and the training plan based on that. So identification of the learning gaps and providing them with the material or the training module or the training opportunity to fill that gap. So that's very important. In all our life, in a traditional educational model, we go to school, we sit on a school, professor talks about something, we goes down, and we don't use. So I did my engineering degree, I only used 10% of it, right? And what I call this is a push learning model. The world is changing. We live in a very dynamic environment. Internet is available to most people. What I call it, we need to move to a more pull-based learning model. What I mean by pull-based learning model, again, is a similar concept of lean, push, and pull, is to know what you don't know and then identify the skill and then try to acquire that knowledge. So this is where I think I would say the training and development should come in. It's identification of the learning gaps and fill that gap. So the tools available, skill metrics, succession planning, professional certification, again, we talked about SIPs and APEX a lot. I hugely encourage to do that. Again, I talked about self-assessment. So before I move to the next slide, we can move to the next slide. One thing I notice as a leader and a manager of people, when you sit down as a manager and work on those development plan and a training plan and the coaching plans with your team, you gain a huge amount of engagement, right? And this is what I found very, very interesting and very satisfying in a sense, right? So if you work with people over the 2 years and after the 2 years, I think you end up being, being a better professionals and a more skilled professionals, I feel very, very gratitude, and they feel very obliged. So you create an engagement, you create alignment. So when you create an engagement and alignment with your team, you get results. That's for sure, right? So to get results, you have to do that. So this is a real life examples I've created for my division over the 3 years, right? I think the key point to note here is you see the 2018 is targeted. So we said we need to have one person who should be APEX certified, and we need to have a university collaboration, right? So we found out we need to find graduates from the university and basically hire them because they already have a supply chain degree, for example, and then grow them as a supply chain graduates. So this is the agenda I pushed. And I'm happy to share, in last 10 years, I have 6 promotions, and never a company has to hire somebody from outside. So succession planning was already there. Okay, so next one, core process. So what is a process? In my head, the simple definition of a process is there's an input, there's a box of activity, something is happening, and there's an output, right? So I try to think about designing a process, I always think about what my inputs are, what are the activities in the box which I need to manage, and what are the outputs. So to understand the characteristics that impact key processes, so this is what we need to understand. What are the inputs and outputs that will affect, and what systems we're going to use? I have an interesting story on this process, just to make a point on how important the process design is, which is easier actually, and how important is to implement the process. The implementation part is the most difficult part. So I went to a plant. It was a struggling plant in Warwick Hydraulics. The job is to turn around that plant. I think the on-time delivery was 56%. Inventory was super high. Actually, I have a slide on that at the end. So we implement an S&OP process. By the way, I have a workshop tomorrow if people want to attend on S&OP. We implement a master production scheduling, a strong inventory management process, leader standard work, continuous improvement tools, a lot of stuff. But what I found out, the on-time delivery was not making this big jump, which I thought they would do. So after analysis, we found out the deliveries are late on the average of 2 to 3 days. which is very strange. So customers are not complaining, but I don't see in my metric. As I said, supply chain is very mathematical. You can measure everything. So I walked through, as a lead, I walked through every step of the process. So I went to my planners, I went to the manufacturing guys, I went to the day shift production group leaders, and so everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, right? So next day I come up, still same issue. We missed by 1 day. Then after asking a lot of questions, what I figured out, the people in the night shift are not hitting their numbers. They're not making the work orders, the production work orders on the assembly line as they should do. So without giving any warning, I end up in a night shift. And they were all scared like they saw a ghost, right? I was some like an alien and they did not expect me to see. So I saw one of the team leaders was sleeping, some people were having smoke, and guess what? So when we give them a work orders, which is in a sequence to hit on-time delivery, they were not making in that sequence. They're just picking the orders the way the sequence they want, and that is why we are late 1 to 2 days. So I learned 2 things from that. So one thing is setting up a process. The second thing is people understand, right? And the third is basically you go and follow. So as soon as they know, then I'm coming and see them in the evening shift as well, right? Next time it never happens, right? So once you set up the process, the key message is make sure you, as a leader or a manager, you walk through the process. Are the people following it or not? So some examples of the key processes we implemented: ABC analysis, very common, highly recommended to use. SN, sales and inventory operations planning, excess and obsolete inventory, supply chain mapping, and supply development. And I would recommend supply chain mapping to most people. And I would say do the supply chain mapping by product line. Okay, again, this is again a real life example in terms of how we decide what processes we want to implement and how we want to achieve it. Okay, now systems. Question on systems. How many people are part of any ERP or any systems deployment and it went all fine? Same questions as Richard, right? Did it went fine? It never. 1, 2, mostly not. Mostly not. So few people says very good. Few people think it's successful. Most of you are not. The problem with systems are they are mostly stupid, right? Right. The systems are nothing but a software or any arithmetic logic which is designed to do certain things. So if you do not have the right processes around it and the people are not trained, it is never going to work, right? Again, I've been part of 3 ERP systems, a very recent example. We have spent about $3 million in implementing SAP, very famous ERP system, and another $1 million to fix it, right? The reason we did that is basically 2 reasons, right? The first, people trying to use SAP in the old processes. Oh, I used to get this report, I don't get it now. Or I used to get this button on my Access, I can't do this. So we need to train people how to adopt the new business processes based on the new systems rather than the other way around. Because if you want to use the new system, let's call it an ERP system, with the old processes, what you end up is nothing, right? That's first thing. The second thing which people realized is we need to train people, which again is a part of the deployment plan, in terms of how to use the new system. And the training is one thing you do in the artificial environment, the second in the real environment. So very much focus on the people, of the training of the people, of the systems in the real environment. So before you go, so now people come and ask me, oh, I want to develop a new forecasting system or new spend management system. The only question I ask to them, okay, that's fine, happy to listen to that. But tell me what are the key processes it will change and how it will impact people's job. And they can't answer me this question and they go away. And so I said, unless you come back with the answer to that question, I'm not listening. So again, a word of advice there. So real life examples where we have implemented a vendor managed inventory system we want to also implement a demand forecasting was used in one plant. What I want to do is to implement in all the plants. So that was pretty good. Okay, last one. So hopefully my animation works. Yes, it does work. Great. So you can see on the x-axis we have time. So this is a typical, let's call it scenario of execution in time. On the y-axis you have effort. What I've seen generally happens is, People decide, okay, this is what we want to implement. This is our strategy. So they spend a lot of time and effort in discussing the green one, big circle. They spend less time and effort in basically listing the actions and what they want to do, and a very small execution, a small time and effort in actually in execution. What I would suggest is this, right? Two main differences, right? Is very clear. What I would suggest to people is spend less time and effort in discussing, slightly more in listing down what you want to do, and actually more time in the execution. Because give yourself a time to fail. Again, related to the quote I said. You have to give yourself a time, if you fail something, how you're going to come back and fix it. So that's first message from this slide. The second key message from this slide is the circles are overlapped. So those activities of discussion, listing down actions, and execution, it needs to be overlapped. If you can do in chunks, in the circles on the part, it's not going to work. So once you achieve those, achieve something, what I've noticed is also you should celebrate success, which we'll do by tonight. There's a big party I keep hearing about. It engages employees. It creates a greater level of satisfaction, and it creates work-life balance, right? One common complaint from what I see when I work with supply chain people, we don't have time, we do long hours. And I think if somebody is working long hours, I'm not sure about here, but definitely in UK and Middle East, something is wrong. So people need to find this work-life balance, in my opinion. Okay, so I think I've been shown our time, so I just need to rush here. So again, a real-life example. So when I join any new team, the first thing I do with them, I get them to a room, and I said, okay, I don't know anything about you, the business, and you guys. Let's do a SWOT analysis. So let's discuss amongst ourselves, what do you think, what's our strengths, what's our weaknesses, what's our opportunities, and what's our threats, right? So you can see in this project, people think we are good in project management, we are good in career planning. However, we are not really good in supply management, just for example. Okay, so those strengths and weaknesses becomes part of this sort of document. So at the start of this year, I always do this with my team. I said, okay, what's our key goals we want to achieve? We want to achieve 95% on-time delivery. We have inventory targets. We have a lead time targets. And again, you can see there is a special separate box for the people, right? So very clear plan in terms of people development, what we want to achieve in next 1 to 5 years. So everybody is clear in terms of where they are, where they want to go, and how they want to develop themselves. Strategic projects. I like projects. Projects are good. So supply chain is very transactional. You have to buy material, you have to make material, you have to ship material. But what you have to do as a manager is, I think, take a step back and identify the 2 or 3, maybe more, key transformational projects. So this year, we want to deploy S&OP process, for example. What we want to do is to implement a vendor-managed inventory, right? What we want to do is to maybe gain more insights into category management. And if you make them a project, the beauty of project is there is a very clear goal and there is a very clear end. So there has to be a starting point and there's an end point. And once you present this document, that for me, then measuring people and assessing performance for my team and my people becomes very easier. So when we have the end of year discussions with them, we say, okay, did we achieve our people's goals? Did we achieve our operational goals? Or did we complete all the projects, right? So the discussions with the team become very, very clear, right? It becomes very easy. And at the end, if they achieve the goals, they generally like it. Okay, so if you leave nothing from today's discussion, I think this is an important slide. So while the year progresses and you're trying to implement new processes, new systems, developing people, what I would say is document them, right? Document then what you have done by what time. Then if you see the results and improvement, you should see something like this. So when I started, the on-time delivery was 56. We end up with 86% within the 12 months time. The inventory was high for 4.8 million. We end up at 3.95. So when you ask any sales guys, oh, we want to improve our customer service, reduce lead time, the first thing they will say, oh, put the inventory in. And as a supply chain manager, I said, No, that is not the solution. I think as Oren said earlier, you can achieve really high levels of customer service by not putting inventory, but actually by having the right processes, by managing the right system properly, and doing the right things. This is how you achieve good customer service and improve working capital. Okay, so I think I achieved well on time. Thank you very much. Any questions?